I stood frozen, the phone clutched in my trembling hand. My heart pounded against my chest as the voice on the other end repeated the words that shattered my world. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter Sophie has been in an accident." Rushing into action, I dialed Alan's number. He needed to be there for Sophie. For us, the call connected, and I heard the distant sound of laughter and casual chatter. "Alan, you need to come to the hospital right now. It's Sophie. I began, my voice choked with panic. "What now, Laura?" Alan's voice was edged with annoyance, a stark contrast to my distress. "I told you I had an important outing with my boss today. Can't this wait?" "No, it can't wait," I cried out, feeling a surge of frustration. "Sophie's been in a car accident. She's in the hospital." There was a brief pause. Then, in a tone devoid of warmth, Alan said, "So, what do you want me to do about it?" His words hit me like a physical blow. "What do I want? She's your daughter too, Alan. How can you even say that?" "I don't care, Laura. Golfing with my boss is more important. You handle it." His voice was cold, unyielding. Tears streamed down my face, my body shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "How can you be so heartless? She could be." The line went dead. He had hung up. I stood there alone, feeling a profound sense of betrayal. Alan, the man I had loved, the father of my child, had turned his back on us. I rushed to the hospital, my mind a whirlwind of fear and anger. The drive was a blur. Every red light a torturous delay, each passing second an eternity. Arriving at the hospital, I ran through the corridors, guided by a mixture of maternal instinct and adrenaline. Sophie was lying in a hospital bed, her face pale and her eyes closed. The sight of her, so fragile and vulnerable, reignited a fierce protectiveness within me. I took her hand, whispering words of love and encouragement, even though she couldn't hear me. Hours passed, a torturous wait for news. Finally, a doctor approached. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter is stable. She's lucky. The injuries aren't life-threatening. She needs rest and should make a full recovery." Relief washed over me, followed by a renewed sense of anger towards Alan. How could he not be here at a time like this? His absence was a silent testament to his indifference, a stark contrast to the fear and concern that had consumed me. Returning home that night, the house felt emptier, colder. Alan's indifference had carved a chasm in our family that seemed impossible to bridge. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew something had irrevocably changed. The man I had married, the father of my child, was a stranger to me now. I made a decision that night. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of a man who valued his career over his own daughter's life. Our family, once filled with love and laughter, had become a facade, and I was determined to break free from it. I drifted into a restless sleep, my mind made up. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming our lives. But for tonight, my heart ached for the family we once were, now lost to Alan's unfathomable indifference. The days following Sophie's accident were a blur of hospital visits and silent dinners. Alan's absence was a constant, gnawing presence in our home. He neither visited Sophie nor inquired about her condition. It was as if we had ceased to exist in his world. One evening, as Sophie and I sat at the dinner table, the weight of his absence hung heavily between us. "Mom, why hasn't Dad come to see me? Did I do something wrong?" Sophie's voice was small, tinged with confusion and hurt. I reached across the table, taking her hand. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. Your dad, he's just caught up with work." "But he didn't even call," she whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I struggled to find words that could shield her from the painful truth. "Sometimes people show their love in different ways, Sophie. Maybe he just doesn't know how to express his worry." Sophie didn't seem convinced. Her eyes, once filled with admiration for her father, now mirrored the disillusionment I felt. In the weeks that followed, Alan's indifference grew more pronounced. He would leave early in the morning and return late at night, avoiding any interaction with us. Sophie's attempts to talk to him were met with cold dismissiveness, leaving her increasingly dejected. One Saturday, I decided to confront Alan. I waited for him in the living room, my nerves taut with anticipation. When he walked through the door, his eyes flickered with surprise at seeing me awake. "Alan, we need to talk. About us. About Sophie," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He sighed, a sound of exasperation, and tossed his keys on the table. "What now, Laura? I'm tired." "It's about Sophie. She needs her father. She's been through so much, and you've just been absent." Alan scoffed, his expression hardening. So what? I provide for this family. Isn't that enough? I don't have time for this melodrama. Melodrama? I felt a surge of anger. Our daughter was in a hospital bed, scared and alone, and you couldn't even spare a moment for her? Alan shrugged, an infuriatingly nonchalant gesture. She's your responsibility. I have more important things to deal with. His words stung, a bitter confirmation of his detachment from the family we once cherished. Is your job really more important than your own daughter's well-being? I'm doing this for our future, Laura. You wouldn't understand, he retorted, turning away from me. I watched him walk away, a growing realization dawning on me. Alan was no longer the man I married. He had become a stranger, his heart hardened by ambition and apathy. That night, as I lay beside Sophie, her soft breathing a comfort in the darkness, I knew that our family was beyond repair. Alan's neglect had not only hurt me, but it had also wounded Sophie, an innocent caught in the crossfire of his indifference. A plan began to form in my mind, a resolve to protect my daughter from further hurt. Alan had shown us his true colors, and it was time for me to act. No longer would I stand by and watch as he tore our family apart. The days turned into weeks, and the Cold War at home raged on. Alan's indifference was like a thick fog that refused to lift. Sophie's attempts to engage with her father were met with stony silence or curt replies. The once joyful atmosphere of our home had turned stifling, filled with unspoken resentments and hurtful silences. One afternoon, as I was tidying Alan's study, a piece of paper slipped out from a book. It was a receipt for a jewelry store, dated 2 weeks ago. The item listed was a woman's bracelet, expensive and elegant. A knot formed in my stomach. I had never seen this bracelet, nor had Alan mentioned buying any jewelry. The receipt ignited a flicker of suspicion. Was there someone else? My mind raced with the implications. I needed to know more, to understand what was happening. Determined, I called my friend Miranda, who worked at a law firm. Miranda, I think Alan might be having an affair. I found a receipt for a bracelet that I've never seen. There was a pause, and then Miranda's voice, firm and supportive. Laura, I can recommend a private investigator. They're discreet and can help you find out what's going on. I agreed. It was a drastic step, but I had to know the truth. Weeks passed, and the investigator provided updates. Photos of Alan with a younger woman, dates and times of their meetings, even a recording of a conversation where he spoke tenderly to her. Each piece of evidence was a blow to my heart, a confirmation of my worst fears. One evening, with Sophie at a friend's house, I confronted Alan. The photos lay scattered on the table, undeniable proof of his betrayal. Alan, who is she? My voice trembled, a mix of anger and pain. He froze, his eyes darting to the photos. Where did you get these? He stammered. That's not important. Answer me. Who is she? Alan's face hardened, his usual indifference replaced by a defensive anger. It's none of your business. I have my life, you have yours. My business, I laughed bitterly. You're my husband, Alan. Or have you forgotten? He sneered, a cruel twist to his lips. I haven't forgotten, Laura, but let's be honest, our marriage has been dead for years. I found someone who understands me, who appreciates me. His words cut deep, but I stood my ground. And what about Sophie? Does she fit into this new life of yours? Alan shrugged, a dismissive, heartless gesture. Sophie's your daughter. You deal with her. The finality in his voice was a revelation. Alan had checked out of our marriage, out of his role as a father. He had moved on, leaving us behind like discarded memories. Tears of frustration and grief blurred my vision. You've abandoned us, Alan, for a fling. Is she worth losing your family? Alan didn't answer, just turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the shattered pieces of our life. That night, I lay in bed, a plan forming in my mind. Alan had chosen his path, and now I would choose mine. For Sophie, for our future. Alan would learn that his actions had consequences, that he couldn't just discard us without a fight. I would make sure of it. The discovery of Alan's affair was like a poison seeping through the remnants of our family life. Each day that followed was a reminder of his betrayal. Sophie, sensing the tension, became increasingly withdrawn, her bright spirit dimmed by the growing rift within our home. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to confront Alan again. He had just returned from work, and the air between us was thick with unspoken words. Alan, we need to talk about the divorce, I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked at me, his expression one of annoyance. So you've decided to play that card? Fine, let's get it over with. The casualness of his response infuriated me. This is not a game, Alan. You've destroyed our family. You've hurt your own daughter with your selfishness. Alan scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. Don't be melodramatic, Laura. It's just a divorce. People go through it all the time. Just a divorce? I echoed, incredulous. You cheat, you lie, and now you act as if it's nothing? A gesture that fueled my anger. It is what it is. I've moved on. You should too. Moved on. The words echoed in my mind, a stark reminder of how far we had drifted apart. What about Sophie? Did you even think about her in all this? Alan's expression hardened. Sophie will be fine. She's your daughter after all. The implication of his words hit me like a slap. What do you mean by your daughter? She's our daughter, Alan. He smirked, a cruel twist to his lips. Let's not kid ourselves, Laura. We both know that's not true. His insinuation left me reeling. The implication that Sophie wasn't his daughter was absurd, a desperate attempt to justify his actions. You're delusional, Alan. Sophie is your daughter, and you've just abandoned her. Alan's expression shifted to one of disdain. Believe what you want, Laura. I'm done with this conversation. As he walked away, I realized that the man I had married, the father of my child, was a stranger to me. His heart was clouded by lies and selfishness, his actions driven by a disregard for the family we once had. That night, as I lay in bed, a determination took root in my heart. Alan had chosen his path, and it was time for me to choose mine. I would fight for Sophie, for our dignity, for justice. Alan had to face the consequences of his actions. It was time for him to understand the pain he had inflicted on us, the damage he had done to our family, and I was going to make sure he did. The morning sun cast a pale light across the kitchen where I sat, legal documents spread out before me. Today was the day I would confront Alan with everything, the evidence of his affair, his lies, everything laid bare. My heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. Sophie had left for school, her eyes still shadowed with the remnants of our fractured family life. The house was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. When Alan finally entered, he was taken aback by the sight of the documents. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone wary. "These are divorce papers, Alan, and evidence of your affair," I replied, my voice steady. He scoffed, glancing at the papers with disdain. "So you're going through with this. You think you can threaten me?" "This is not a threat, Alan. It's a consequence of your actions," I said firmly. Alan picked up a photo from the pile, his face paling as he recognized the woman with him. "Where did you get these?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been lying and cheating, and now you're going to face the consequences." Alan's facade of indifference cracked, revealing a flicker of panic. "You can't prove anything with these photos. They prove nothing. I have more than photos, Alan. I have testimonies, receipts, everything. You can't deny it anymore." For a moment he looked cornered, like an animal caught in a trap. Then his expression shifted to one of arrogance. "Fine, let's get divorced. I don't care. I'm done with this sham of a marriage." His words were like daggers, but I refused to let them wound me. "It's not just about the divorce, Alan. It's about Sophie. You've hurt her, abandoned her." Alan snorted, a sound of contempt. "Sophie has always been your daughter more than mine. I have no obligation towards her." His callousness was a blow, but I stood my ground. "You are her father, Alan. You can't just abandon her because it's convenient for you." Alan's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "We'll see about that. I have my lawyers. They'll make sure I don't have to pay a dime for a child that might not even be mine." The accusation was a shock, but I refused to let it shake me. "Sophie is your daughter, Alan. You know that. Your lies won't change the truth." Alan didn't respond, just turned and left the room, his steps heavy with the weight of his deceit. As he disappeared, I knew that this battle was just beginning. Alan had shown his true colors, and I was ready to fight back. For Sophie, for our dignity, for justice. He would not get away with his betrayal. Not without a fight. The day of the court hearing dawned, gray and overcast, mirroring the turmoil in my heart. As I sat in the sterile courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. Today, Alan would be held accountable for his actions. Alan sat across the room, his expression one of smug confidence. He seemed to believe he could charm his way out of any situation, even this. But the evidence was irrefutable. When the judge called the session to order, my lawyer presented the case with precision. The affair, the neglect, the emotional trauma inflicted on Sophie and me. Alan's lawyer tried to counter, painting him as a devoted father and husband, a victim of circumstance. It was a desperate, flimsy defense. As Alan took the stand, his demeanor was one of practiced innocence. These accusations are baseless. I've always provided for my family. This is just a vindictive move by my wife. His words made my blood boil, but I remained silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. When my turn came, I spoke from the heart. Alan abandoned us, emotionally and physically. He was never there for Sophie when she needed him the most. His affair was the final betrayal. Alan's face twisted in anger as I spoke, but he remained silent, knowing any outburst would only harm his case. After hours of testimonies and deliberations, the judge delivered the verdict. Alan was found guilty of marital misconduct. He was ordered to pay a substantial amount in child support and alimony. The justice of it was a small balm to my wounded heart, but the true victory came outside the courtroom. As we exited, reporters swarmed around us, drawn by the scandal of a prominent businessman caught in an affair. Alan's face was a mask of fury as he pushed through the crowd, his reputation tarnished by his own actions. I watched him go, a sense of closure filling me. He had lost more than just the case today. He had lost his dignity, his respectability. As I drove home, a sense of peace settled over me. The legal battle was over, but the fight for a new life for Sophie and me was just beginning. We would rebuild, step by step, leaving the shadows of the past behind. Alan had faced the consequences of his actions, and now it was time for us to move forward, into a future filled with hope and healing. Months had passed since the court ruling. The divorce was final, and with it came a sense of liberation. Sophie and I had started to rebuild our lives, piece by piece, finding joy in the small moments that we once took for granted. I had returned to work, embracing the challenges and satisfaction it brought. Sophie, now more resilient and mature, was excelling in school, her laughter once again a regular melody in our home. But the true retribution came unexpectedly. One evening, as Sophie and I were finishing dinner, a news report caught our attention. The screen showed Alan, his face haggard, his once confident posture now deflated. The reporter's voice narrated the downfall of the once respected businessman. Alan Thompson, facing multiple lawsuits for unethical business practices and sexual harassment, has been ousted from his company. His assets have been frozen pending investigation. Sophie looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, is that true?" I nodded, a complex mix of emotions swirling within me. "Yes, it seems your father's actions have caught up with him." The report continued, detailing Alan's rapid fall from grace. His affair had been the catalyst, but his unethical behavior in business had been his undoing. His reputation was in ruins, his career over. Sophie reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "I feel sorry for him, Mom. He's lost everything." I squeezed back, proud of her compassionate heart. "It's a hard lesson, Sophie. Actions have consequences. He made his choices, and now he must face them." In the days that followed, Alan's downfall became the talk of the town. He tried to reach out to us, emails and messages filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But Sophie and I were firm in our resolve. We had moved on, leaving the pain he had caused behind. The final blow came when Alan's mother, my former mother-in-law, came to visit. She had been supportive throughout the ordeal, her disappointment in her son palpable. "Laura, I'm sorry for everything. Alan has lost his way, and I can't support his actions. You and Sophie have shown incredible strength," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Thank you," I replied, grateful for her support. "We're moving forward, focusing on the future." As she left, I watched Sophie playing in the yard, her laughter a balm to my soul. We had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more united. Alan's downfall was his own making, a result of his choices and actions. For us, it was a chance to start anew, free from the shadows of betrayal and deceit. In the end, justice had prevailed, not just in the courtroom, but in the karmic retribution that life had dealt Alan. Sophie and I, hand in hand, stepped into our new life, filled with hope and the promise of brighter days.